we think that drivers of policy innovation from top, we can also learn from failed experiments. But the issue is failed experiments are costly, financially, politically, even socially. They can even cost lives. I'll give an example of an irrigation scheme. If you don't do the right thing, you flood a huge area and people can die. We had that in some countries. I don't want to name countries, but it is very important that we also learn from experiments that failed. Here at the university, we normally encourage students to do experiments at a small scale, but also there's a lot to learn from failure. Policy change usually is gradual, and we have also, I'll talk about that later, but also learning from others. And with this, the Marable panel has done a very good job across Africa. We talk to policy makers and also exchange ideas with technical people in ministries so that we can learn from each other. It is important also fostering policy innovation. We learn from positive change. You know, there can also be negative change. Here we're talking about how we need to understand positive change. For example, finding where progress is taking place. For a number of years now, a country like Rwanda that had a genocide in the 90s has become an icon in a number of areas. That's progress. That's good. It's good for our continent. We can learn from that. And then, of course, also identifying critical success factors. Now, what did other people do that we can easily replicate? As the English say, it's not wise to reinvent the wheel. Also, what are the good practices? What dialogue or exchanges should we have to make Africa move faster? Here are a few slides where we think progress has been made, and there are some lessons to be learned. For example, in the 90s, the annual agriculture expenditure was very small. Now we have an increase across the continent of almost 86%. That is good news. The agricultural gross product, agricultural gross domestic product on average across Africa, it has improved by 63%. We've had also across Africa, we've had a share, a decrease of people who live below the poverty line. Poverty still exists, but at least we've made some significant improvement in areas of malnutrition and even just knowledge. Just people to know that nutrition is important. I think that has moved across Africa in a positive direction. We have also increase in life expectancy. There are a number of graphs that are hidden in this. You have also, if you look also globally and also in Africa, being a subset of the global curve, also the number of women, the number of children women give birth to has dropped since the mid-60s. The education of the girl child. Here in Uganda, at Makerere, where I am, we have a motto that says the education of a girl child is the education of a nation. If you look at the number of girls that have been able to access education, it's phenomenal across Africa. We've also, if you look at Africa has performed better than the BRICS and world average, okay, in the number of agricultural value added. So there's some good news coming out of Africa. But of course, we still have some bad news. Africa is a very interesting bag, if I may say. It's a mixed bag. We have good news and bad news, but I think it's true elsewhere across the world. There are some areas where we still have work to do in hunger. Hunger still persists, which is a big shame, because geographically Africa is well endowed in natural resources. We have the land, we have the water, but most important, we have the people. So if you look at East Africa, Central Africa, West Africa, we still have a long way to go because our values in terms of hunger, people who sleep without food, is still a bit high. I like this graph. I first saw this graph sometime in Senegal when one of the Marable panel members, Osman, was presenting it. And I really liked this because Africa was on the trajectory of takeoff. If you look at it critical and objectively, is that we've lost a number of decades. We could have been now at 1,000 on average, 1,900 at the growth rate where we had in the 60s, but somewhere in the mid 70s, that's when we lost it. We've grown on average as Africa, but now we are at 1,200. That's the average, the continental average. We still have some work to do. So in other words, we need 5% annual growth rate to catch up. I think we are doing it. We are doing it because as a continent, there are countries that have become an envy, if I should use that word, of the world. The impressive growth rates. The other day I was reading an article, people migrating from Portugal to Angola to look for jobs. Angola's economy is growing at an impressive rate. So we have some opportunities to learn. More countries are growing faster. If you look at that map of agriculture, GDP growth rates across Africa in the 90s, you compare it in the 2000s, there's some good news there. Progress is uneven, but it's formidable. And then, of course, we have opportunities to replicate the success story, especially at policy level. Osman has introduced the Marable panel. I invite you also to look at it, to join the website and look at these incredible minds. Here you have photos of 17 of us, but we have an 18th very sharp lady. You can visit the website. You'll see all the profiles there of eminent persons. We also have a patron, the Marable panel, His Excellency, the Right Honorable Dr. Chirema, the Vice President of Malawi, is hugely involved. The other day we had Benin, the Minister of State in charge of planning and development, is also proudly associated with the Marable panel. Now let's go to, briefly I talk about the mechanization, which is the gist of this talk. Overview, generally, Africa, I've already talked about the land potential. That's undoubted. Africa is the only continent that still has a huge chunk of land where we can clear and grow food and feed the world. We have a lot of opportunities, but of course, opportunities come with risks. And of course, we also have policy lessons, which I've already talked about, to learn from other countries. This is an example of low mechanization. This is a common site in Africa where farmers become creative. They lack capital to mechanize. This is cassava, for those who don't know. Cassava, which is one of the biggest sources of starch in the world, very high quality stuff, but they lack mechanization and investments in that. So lack of mechanization keeps the output low. So simply more mechanization is not the solution, but we need to take a value chain approach. And this I'll explain later in the following slides. So changes in agriculture have taken place in Africa, but we still have challenges. One, labor shortages. I think if you've been in Africa, in any country in Africa, you'll be amazed by rural-urban migration. It is incredible. Or just a city of Dar es Salaam, for example, in Tanzania, you talk about 500,000 people migrating each year. The enormous pressure of people riding motorcycles. Here in Uganda, you call them border borders. People looking for a better living, better income, has really put a lot of strain in urban areas. So labor shortages in rural areas is a really big reality. But of course, also on the other hand, we have also areas, countries where medium and large scale farms have opened up. I'll give an example of my country in Uganda. Northern Uganda, because of the new market in Southern Sudan, a lot of farms in Northern Uganda are medium and large scale because of the huge market to supply food in Southern Sudan. So there are also opportunities for mechanization on small scale at low cost. Tractor hiring now is no longer a new thing in Africa. It is happening here in Uganda. I think in East Africa, if I may say, on average, you can hire maybe a tractor to clear an acre for around $80 US. This wasn't there some 20 years ago. So it's positive progress. I've already talked about urbanization. Urbanization comes with, it has a lot of subsets, issues of organizing housing, water, transport, logistics, food, all that. And of course, crime also comes, the policing becomes more important, and the demand for processed foods in a timely manner. That also is critical. Now, I like this slide very much because it emphasizes the gist of the matter of this report, because in the report, we took a value chain approach. And this is the point I talked about in a few slides before, that intervention at one level will not trigger Africa, will not take Africa to the next level. In other words, if we talk about mechanization, mechanization should be across the whole value chain. When we talk about mechanization at farm level, for example, application of fertilizers, irrigation. Now the new thing is adding fertilizers, irrigation, and you have fertigation. Instead of first irrigating and then you go out to add the fertilizers. Now the fertilizers are added in water and you irrigate once with the fertilizer. So now you have fertigation by which is mechanized. Crop land, one of the biggest costs we have in Africa is bush clearance. Bush clearance is very costly because the stumps will bring down even the best tractor. You cannot mechanize without bush clearance. So we need all those equipment. Then we take to another level, which is post-harvest handling. The figures of post-harvest handling in Africa are staggering. For example, in fruits and vegetables, we lose somewhere between 40 to 60% of the produce, which is wasted energy, money. Talk about global warming and all that, because as the fruits and vegetables rot away, you have a methane being released. Then we talk about value addition, which is processing. Also mechanization there is important. Packaging, the package is good as the product inside. It's important we pay attention to that. We have issues of traceability, being able to trace the product in case of a problem. Some years ago, we had problems, you may remember, we had problems with milk in China, for example, but companies were able to trace it back to where it came from. So traceability is critical, and that also comes with mechanization because you have the barcodes, and then you are able to go back to which farm, which farmer or which processing plant had a problem. Value addition also, mechanization is also very good for transportation because transportation becomes easier. I think Africa needs to also, many African countries need to invest in that. Mechanization also has benefits for better food systems. Of course, it reduces drudgery, timeliness. Of course, I've already talked about post-harvest value addition. I'll give an example of value addition. I'll give an example of my country, Uganda. Uganda is maybe the 6th or the 7th largest producer of coffee in the world. But a country like Germany that doesn't have a single tree of coffee makes more money than Uganda, which grows the coffee. Why? Because they invested in value addition. Okay, so it is important Africa pays attention to value addition. The size, farm size is a key factor. Fragmented size farms, also the small scale farms, less than 2 acres, they are very difficult to mechanize. So we talk about medium to large scale farms because that is what is easier to mechanize. And also I don't know if you think about it, but also issues of employment. A large scale or medium scale farm is most likely going to employ also professional labor, agriculture engineers, irrigation engineers, agriculture economists than a small scale farmer, which is using a hoe. So I think also scale is important. We also talk about employment, because that's one of the challenges we have in Africa. Now, the rise of processed foods. I can tell you, if you walked in any supermarket in Africa, I guarantee you, if you look at the juice you are going to drink, I'll give an example. On average now, all the apples I eat in East Africa more or less come from the Western Cape of South Africa. So you talk about powdered milk. Powdered milk I drink here in Kampala is from New Zealand. So the issue of processed foods is critical, because once you process foods, you don't only increase the shelf life, but also you increase the geographical location, the geographical mileage in which they can cover. So you talk about, if you look at this slide, you see that processed foods have a low chance of success. By just processing, we increase the value almost to 20% or more. That's a topic I'm happy to discuss on its own, because it's really dear also to my heart. We talked about production at farm level. You see all these. I talked about land preparation. You are able to see that a lot of, this is also good news for Africa. A lot of companies have come. The pedal pump in Burkina Faso, in Uganda, has been a very good hit for small-scale farmers, especially those of fruit and vegetables. In Senegal, the rice thrasher cleaner, I have read that story and heard women talk about how it revolutionized their lives. The two-wheel tractor in Kenya. This has, in Kenya and Tanzania, it has been very successful. In some countries, it hasn't been successful because of the terrain and the type of soils. And that also brings in the element of local research, R&D for our people. The tractor hiring services, I've already talked about them. In the report, we saw good examples of how successful they have been in Malawi, in Ethiopia, and Nigeria. We've also seen successful stories in post-harvest. The solar cold stations in Nigeria. I've seen some also in South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal. I visited some of them there. They've been a successful story. And also integrating biogas with solar for drying and processing. I've seen also those have been very successful. Motorized tricycle is a good story in Ghana and also in Senegal. Staple processing. If you look, I think in their report, I don't remember, but I think a country like Nigeria spends more money in importing cereals and toothpicks from Thailand, yet they can do it there in Nigeria. But that has been from the time the current president of the African Development Bank was the Minister of Agriculture. That has been, there's been a reverse in that trend to make Nigeria also become one of the biggest producers of cereals. That's good news. The mango example in Kenya, in Western Kenya, also Kenya has done a good job. The mangoes we eat now in Uganda are from Kenya, which is very good. Uganda exports pineapples. We have very good, we've organized our culture. The Nigerian examples in cassava, they have been continental, and the private sector has played a very big role in this. And also policy, because Nigeria example, when the government took a deliberate effort to integrate cassava into the baking industry, that revolutionized the cassava in Nigeria. So that also shows an example how policy can create jobs and also change how a product is taken. Another example I can think of is how the Ethiopian government also revolutionized taking coffee because they used to struggle with the market, marketing coffee until they decided to also promote coffee drinking in Ethiopia. And that has been a huge success. Mechanization has also contributed to job creation, good jobs, decent jobs. I've already talked about rural-urban migration. Everybody wants a good future, it wants a good life. So people migrate looking for opportunities. But of course, this comes with training. Industrial jobs are not normal jobs. Sometimes you need some education, training, and of course also creativity. The private sector has a role to play in Africa. We wrote this in the report. There are also some risks, mismanagement of machinery has been a problem. Most of African countries have struggled with instrumentation. You go to a farm, a modern farm, and just one missing pin. A tractor can't drive because there is a missing pin somewhere. There's been also a rise in rural unemployment with no labor shortage, risks of soil erosion because of changing land use, exclusion of small-scale farmers. Africa, 70% of the African farmers are women, but because of the technology and the size of farms and the pace at which Africa is moving, sometimes you find small-scale farmers, especially if they don't form cooperatives, if they decide to stand on their own, they are at a huge risk. So of course, also I've talked about under investment in R&D. For example, the two-wheeler tractor was successful in some countries, but in some countries it wasn't successful. It just needed R&D to tailor it to local conditions. Some progress has been made. Of course, everybody wants to be in the green corner where you have high mechanization and high agricultural growth. That is admirable. Of course, also you invest little in mechanization, but have growth. The bottom is also good, but everybody would prefer to be in the green corner. And these countries like Angola, I've already told you about Angola. Angola is doing a very good job. Botswana, which was a desert, has been able to organize their diamonds and use it for beef. Botswana is one of the biggest producers of beef on the African continent. Ethiopia has done well with the highlands, with the coffee. Malawi has done well. Mali has done well. They talked about the dairy. Mali did a very good job with their dairy sector in policy, despite the instability in northern Mali, but Mali is a very good example. Morocco is one country that doesn't have oil, but they just organized their agriculture and their proximity to Europe. And Morocco is reaping big in agriculture. I've been in Morocco myself, in Rabat, impressive work in agriculture. Rwanda, I already talked about it, and the story goes on and on. I invite you to read the report. So, where has progress taken place? I've already talked about that, the countries. These are the countries, and we think there's something to learn from them. It's not about geographical size, but also policy and good leadership. Successful actions, the report, we wrote very good recommendations at 3 levels: at institutional, program, and implementation. We saw that where progress was, there was dedicated government programs. I've already talked about partnerships, public-private partnerships. For the good example is the cassava in Nigeria. The private sector entered and really made greaters for cassava and revolutionized cassava in that country. Attention to downstream chains, that is critical. R&D, don't ignore R&D, because R&D, every technology is good for the people or the conditions it was made for. You need to tailor technology and training to different environments. Tractor hiring, we also have Uberization of tractor services, and of course, new technologies. As I come to the end, who has done it right? This is also good for you to know. I will repeat this. Ethiopia did the goods hiring services of tractors. Ethiopia also replicated a model they have run so well in their airline industry, parts and maintenance, one of the best in Africa. They also replicated that in agriculture, and the benefits were very good. Ethiopia also has done a good job in training, and training here is not only a university. By the way, industry is run by technical skills, people who can get data. I always give an example. I studied in Europe. I saw how the railway network, for example, runs in Europe. You know, the railway network is not run by graduates. It's run by technicians, people who spend time and do the data work to make sure things work. Mali, incubation centers in Mali are commendable. I gave an example of dairy, but also policy there in dairy. The Mali gave waivers to people who imported dairy equipment. You wouldn't pay taxes, and that because they also have a good cattle history of cattle keeping. That has also paid off. Subsidies in Morocco, partnership with equipment importers and their proximity to a good market in Europe also paid off. Rwanda used the village level mechanization service and R&D, which also worked. Rwanda example is very good because given their terrain, people used to say that you cannot mechanize Rwanda because it's hilly, but that has been debugged, if I may say. Rwanda has done a good job. So conducive business and the service environment in Ethiopia, once again, that has been successful for people who have been there, the hiring service. This just to stress. Morocco example, I've already talked about that, but Morocco also went an extra mile. One of the things that also is impressive, for example, the cold chain support. It means you have to have reliable power supply, and it has to be at a level that is people can afford to pay, and Morocco has done a good job there. One of the other reasons also farmers are not able to make a case is farmers are not businessmen. So if you help them develop business plans and business models, the success rates, and I saw this also in India, they have programs of also helping farmers to develop bankable business plans. That is good. Morocco goes ahead. I invite you to read the report. Rwanda, I've already talked about Rwanda. So as I come to the end, what does the report recommend? Report recommends 7 strong and practical issues or recommendations on mechanization. I beg for your indulgence, I read them. 1, to prioritize national agriculture mechanization investment strategies. Most of the African countries have these strategies, but implementing them and prioritizing them is an issue. Number 2, prioritize mechanization in every segment of the value chain. I've already shown you that if you invest in only farm productivity and you don't invest in value addition, you don't invest in processing, you don't invest in logistics and transport, then work done in one sector will not be carried on. Then of course also the report recommends designing of socially sustainable mechanization pathways, because at the end of the day, the local people must be able to sustain the solutions you propose. Empowering of small-scale farmers and women groups. I've already said women are 70% of the farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. Technology intervention must pay attention to women needs. Then of course also the small-scale farmers, organizing them. I know somebody who has spent almost 30 years organizing farmers. Organizing farmers is not as obvious as it looks. Farm organization, to have them hold elections in a timely manner is also very important. Increase investments in supportive infrastructure and training facility. Here I can think of cold chain support. People, for example, here in most of African countries, just even washing, sorting, grading at farm level is an issue. So post-harvest handling is critical. Training you need somebody to get data, lay pipes for you to irrigate, service your tractor, do that. We need also to create, African governments need to create a conducive business environment, and then develop an African agricultural machinery industry. This is important because I told you that foreign solutions are not always workable here. I think I've done justice to time. I'm sorry for taking too long. If I have, I thank you for listening. I invite you to read also some of these other reports on our website. Thank you, Osman, and thank you for listening. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Noble.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
All right. How come I'm not seeing the video? Okay, now it's there. So thank you for your powerful presentation, and thank you to those who are joining us today again for this webinar. We usually collect a couple of questions, then hand them over to the presenter. So I would like to suggest that you send your questions via email or chat. I assume they have given you the appropriate contact from the team, and I'll be passing your questions to the presenter, who will then Professor Noble, who will then respond to the questions you have. So when you send me your email, just introduce yourself, your name and your affiliation, so I can also refer to that when I pass on the questions. So the floor is now open, and thank you, Noble, again for joining us.
We have received questions in the chat box.
I see one from Martin Fowler. Thanks, Martin,
Absolutely.
for joining us. Is that the first one? Probably. Here, I'm just going to read it to you, Noble, and then hear what your response is to that. You seem to be promoting larger scale, medium scale farms, rather than the smallholder farms, which form the basis of the agricultural economies of most African countries, for being more mechanization friendly. However, did not the Chinese revolution, agricultural revolution to say, take place based on small farmers using technology, machinery appropriate for that size of land holding? So what would the lessons for that would be? That was Martin Fowler, and I get here another one from Mera Shah, if I may continue with those, Prof, and then you come back to that. And thank you, Martin just added his affiliation. Martin Fowler is Agricultural Advisor, USAID. Thanks, Martin, for joining us. Then Mera Shah is asking, mechanization can lead to increased use of energy in agriculture. How do you make sure that increased mechanization does not contribute to global warming and climate change? You might want to take on those two, Prof, while more comments are coming from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Osman. I think, and this is the opinions I express here are my personal opinions. One of the challenges we've had in Africa for a long time, we've promoted we've focused on a small scale farmer. But here are the challenges we found with a small scale farmer. One, the small scale farmer, as the word suggests, they are small. Their productivity is low, no matter what technology you bring forth. Somebody has 1 acre. Someone has 2 acres of land. much as they are the majority, but the small scale farmer has failed to employ the agricultural engineer. So at the university where I'm a professor, we are training engineers to work at farms. But the small scale farmer has no capacity even to feed himself or herself for the whole year. So one of the challenges we've gotten is also jobs. You train a farmer, you train a student for a number of years, but they are not employable by the small scale farmer. That's one. Secondly, Africa has changed very fast. I've shared some slides. There are now markets. For example, 20 years ago, there was no South Sudan market. I'm just using the Ugandan example. Now, the peace in Southern Sudan opened up opportunities for people in northern Uganda because we share a border to focus on serious agriculture. The peace in Kenya, the arming of the nomads in northern East Uganda, in Kenya, the Turkanas, all that, all the way to Ethiopia, Somalia, that opened up avenues for people to move with food and sell for businesses. So I think it is a catch-22 for Africa. I think we need both. I mean, the reality, we have both. We have the small scale and medium and large scale. But if we are talking about employment, there's a high chance that the large scale and the medium scale will employ the graduates and the professions we are churning out in the institutions of learning, and also answer the issues of jobs. I'm lucky to have trained in both in Europe and in the US, and exactly that's what happens in those countries. The students who study, for example, agricultural engineering at Iowa State University, one farmer in Iowa can employ the whole class. Why? Because one farmer has 20 square miles. It's mechanized. He needs people at that level. So we need to think, Africa needs to think of also that kind of model. Even here in Zimbabwe, before the political and economic turmoil, the farmers there used to employ graduates. South Africa, people who go and work seriously at the farm. So scale is important. So I think, I'm afraid, Martin, we need both, because the truth of the matter, we have both the small scale and the large scale to answer some of the challenges we have on the continent. Now, if I come to the other question, mechanization can lead to increased use of energy in agriculture. That is true. How can we make sure that increased mechanization does not contribute to climate change? I think one of the things we need to do is also renewable energy. We need to invest in renewable energy, and also the report has talked about that. Renewable energy, if there is anything God gave us in print, is the sun. I know of a group at MIT that has kind of figured out how to store solar energy. I know I'm aware the American Association of Material Science Engineers has come up with a chemical that you can put on your roof, and your roof automatically becomes a solar panel. So if there is anything we have in plenty, is the sun, and we have it like in Uganda, we sit on the equator. So I think if we invest more time in solar energy, solar energy, renewable energy, I think that can reduce the impact of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof, let me come in here, just join the discussion, especially the point made was Martin. I think you're coming from the angle of job creations for graduates and people being trained. Martin was coming from the angle of how to make the small farmer more productive using mechanical technology. You yourself have invented a small tractor that somebody with 1 acre farm can use, right? So that's what Martin is talking about. It's an issue of appropriate technology, mechanical technology for the small farmers. And given that a large number of our farmers are small, so the impact of that may be much more prominent than the impact of what the medium and large scale farmers can do. So the growth of the sector will probably come from there. Yes, they will not be creating jobs for outsiders, but they will be creating jobs for themselves and their families. I think that's the angle where Martin was coming from, which is important.
Yeah, and if I may add, Osman, to that, and one of I appreciate that. I think one of the other things we need to think about is mechanizing the whole. How can we? I'm just thinking about an idea. How can we make sure that maybe we have a solar panel, someone can wear it, or a cap, and then you have to mechanize some appropriate technology, because Martin is right in that regard, that the impact, because of the scale, the number of people you have as small scale farmers, will have a bigger impact.
Absolutely.
That one is true. So I think we need to also think about, like you've put it, appropriate technology for small scale farmers to have the impact and go away. Osman, don't forget the value chain approach, not only at one stage. We need to have that at all the stages.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, and then Antoine Sala. Antoine, we missed the affiliation, Antoinette, sorry. But let me ask you a question while you send us the affiliation. And thank you for being with us most of the time. So farming and food consultant, welcome, Antoinette. So it's always a pleasure seeing you with us. So Antoinette's question, Prof, is 70% of the active farming population in Africa are women. Which African governments are implementing policies for the adoption or tractor friendly for women? And if I may, Antoinette, just add to that other technologies just around farming or processing, sorry, whatever it is. So which government is keeping that a very strong focus on women-friendly technologies? Is a lack generational business farming the reason why farming is not taking up the graduates, or given countries' vision to be food secure? So there are two questions. The first one is, which government is dealing adequately with the need of women farmers when it comes to mechanization in general? And the second question is, maybe she can clarify that, is a lack of generational business farming the reason why farming is not taken up by graduates or given countries' vision for the, or a given country's vision for to be food secure? Okay, young graduates like yours not getting into farming, is it because of the transfer of generation to generation of farming, or is it just because countries lack the vision that will create the environment for the young graduates to get in? Go ahead, please.
Okay, I begin with which countries. The countries I talked about, Osman, you remember also in report Rwanda. Rwanda took that step to help women. Malawi, we've been physical as the Marable panel in Malawi. Malawi is doing a good job helping women. Tanzania, Uganda, Senegal, the example of the women in Senegal, the rice, the women who are doing a good job. So there are countries, the countries we've talked about actually, because 70% of these farmers are women. The countries we've flagged as success stories, 70% of those are women. So the countries that have done it are countries where, the countries we are flagging are countries that have helped women in different sectors. Morocco, I've been personally in Morocco. I've visited the women in fruits and vegetables, in apples and grapes, in olives. Wonderful job. So those countries have really done a good job. The issue of generational business, I think this is, as Africans, we taking agriculture as a business. We've always been farmers. Most of Africans are farmers. Even all of us, more or less, will retire into farming. Even if I'm a professor myself, but I have a small farm, and I know when my years are done at the university, I'll go to my farm. So we do it, but we've been doing it as for pleasure. What is new now, people are doing it as a business, okay, over years. That concept has now sunk in. So I think it's not generation-wise. People have been handing over land and wealth or inheritance to their children, but the idea was to do farming not as a business. Doing it as a business is a new thing, at least here in East Africa and Southern Africa. I'm aware of that. And then the vision, the graduate thing, your question kind of touches also the previous question. We see each time we train somebody who is not employable, we have trained somebody who is potentially a problem causer. Why? Because you imagine you spend all these years at school and you are not employed. So we now move away from rural urban migration. Now we talk about also the cross international border migration. Why? Because people are looking for opportunities. So it is important that home solutions are found for people to stay in their homes and contribute positively. So I think the vision should be a mix of the two, if I were, the large scale, but also find appropriate technology for small scale farmers, as Osman has suggested, because people need to find employment.
All right. There was a question by Martin Fowler that I missed on your slide 24, and I don't remember what's on that slide, but Martin was asking, why didn't you have Uganda on that slide?
I think the answer is because I'm Ugandan. Okay, let me look at it. Just
look at it, what it is, we can discuss that.
Okay. Can I share my screen such that everybody knows what he's talking about? Share screen. Just a second. Is this the slide I think you are talking about?
Yeah.
That is slide number 24. So why isn't Uganda? I think Uganda is there in one of the, I think it was a mistake. Uganda was one of the countries where Uganda is one of the countries where we have high mechanization but low agricultural growth. That I remember. And the reason is Uganda runs a policy-wise. If you import agricultural machinery, it is tax-free. That's where policy helps. So you don't pay taxes for agricultural equipment and machinery in Uganda. It is tax-free. So you have a lot of agricultural machinery, but you need to organize it such that you also have a high agricultural output. I hope that answers.
Okay, very good. Can you stop sharing so I can see? Okay. Right. Let me look at the. Okay, very good. Martin is biased. Okay, very good. Let me put my own question here to you, Prof. Being one of the leading engineers and teachers and trainers, the slow pace of mechanization in Africa, which we're trying to resolve in many countries with heavily government-led initiative, importing tractors, circulating tractors, the lack of an indigenous manufacturing sector, for example. Can we resolve the issue of mechanization if the government is so heavily involved in leading, not creating space for the private sector, A? And second, can we resolve the issue of mechanization if you don't have a competitive manufacturing sector that targets the complexity and the level of difficulty of a farming sector, right? So there are two things there, both in imports and distribution and maintenance and servicing. I see the government taking the air out of the lungs of the private sector, or at least failing to create that partnership that would create space for them. And then even if you were to do that, can we get there without nurturing a local manufacturing sector that has adapted technologies for our farming sector?
Oh, thank you, Osman. I think that's a very good question. I think let me begin with the second one. The answer is no. I think we are not going to get there without a competitive manufacturing sector. So we need it. Why? Because I've given in the talk, I talked about installation. Go to any hospital, any agricultural farm, and you see some of the equipment that grass is growing over it. What does it mean? A pin, a bolt. Just one bolt can put the whole tractor, or a hitch, because a tractor, these all things you hitch them at the back of the tractor. Just if that hydraulic hitch has a problem, the equipment is not used for its purpose. So my answer to that question, African governments need to invest in the foundry capacity to have people make the small things that build up those equipment. So modern foundries, if you go to China, you go to India, these equipment you see in Africa are made by those foundries, the artisans. Mm-hmm. So we need to build capacities to make those foundries, to make the nuts and bolts of the tractor ourselves. Then, slowly by slowly, we shall build the capacity to do that. There is no country that makes those equipment without modern foundry. It's not there. Before most of Africa was colonized, and I'm sure in Senegal, where you come from, there were blacksmiths in every part of Africa to make equipment. If the equipment they were making was for hunting, because that was the need at that time. But there was a skill, and that skill, we lost it. So I think we need to have modern foundries, because once you have a modern foundry, then on top, the next thing you are going to do is maybe a modern printed circuit board lab, where now the engineers can now write instructions for this machinery to do what you want to do at the farm. So we need to build a house not from the top, we build from the foundation. The foundation is the foundry, then the other things will follow.
Okay, very good. Then there's another weak point that I see there, Prof. Maybe you can comment on that. You just talk about that nut or a bolt missing from a tractor or a hinge, and it's done. The reason is not just one of spare parts; it's also one of skilled technicians for maintenance, right? Mechanization goes hand in hand with professional and vocational training. Operating a tractor is not just like driving any other car. I have learned my lesson. I went to school in Germany and I went for some internship on a farm. And the first time I sat on a tractor, I almost ended in a ditch with that. And I've been driving a car for I don't know how long before I got there. So that just to say that today, if you wanted to be a tractor operator or a maintenance service provider, we just talk about now the farm level, right? Or processing equipment, where do you go to be trained? It cannot be just at the university level, right? Because you have to go through elementary school, secondary school, 4 or 5 years university. We all don't need people at that level, right? But also those who are already working on the farm. And okay. Those who, at a young age would like to specialize something like that. Where is professional vocational training for skills upgrading, for skills development that will allow us to modernize, including mechanize agriculture? And I think that is next to the manufacturing base that you talked about, another weak segment of our search for modern agricultural value chain. What's your take on that?
It is good that you talk about that, Osman, because I'm aware you studied in German right from your undergraduate to PhD. I will also use the German model because I also studied the neighboring country of Belgium for 7 years. One of the things that you should know is, I'll use the example of a Mercedes-Benz. The technician who puts the dashboard of the Mercedes-Benz earns the same amount of money like the guy who designed the board. Germany is the only country that has rewarded technical skills. So in other words, if I lay what is happening in most of the countries in Africa is that also the salary structure favors university graduates. So in other words, there is no incentive in terms of pay. Yeah, if I'm seated in an office somewhere with an AC, with aeration, I earn more money than a person who is in the field laying pipes. So if I'm an irrigation engineer, I sit in my office, I earn more money than a person who is laying pipes. In Germany, it's a technical person earns the same amount of money that like the person who really designed it. I remember when I was a PhD student in Belgium at that time, the Belgians were struggling to get the locals to do PhDs. Why? There was no incentive for them to do PhDs because a PhD holder earned the same amount of money like an undergraduate in Belgium up to today. So I was in the chemical engineering department. If I got a student who got an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering and went to Glaxo Wellcome or BASF in Germany or in Antwerp, and the same amount of money like a guy who had stayed and gotten a PhD, which is not the same in Africa. So I think also we need also to reward technical skills. Then also another problem we have in Africa is the I would say, in turning technical institutions into universities. It's the trend now. People demand to have technical institutions turn into universities. It is fashionable to have a university in your home area, not a technical institution. So here in most of I think that's where we went wrong. I remember technicians who were trained by when our countries were colonies, irrespective of where they were in Africa. Those technicians were good. Why? Because they had exposure. They had the skills, the hands-on. The technicians we get these days, they are, with all due respect, they don't have the technical training. So just to answer you, I think much as we are talking about the foundry or whatever, but we need also another layer to pay attention to technical skills and then reward technical skills. Because if you have them and they are not rewarded, you will not attract the best brains. A person who repairs the railway line in Europe, in Belgium, in Germany, in France, earns the same amount of money. Their salary are not the difference between the day and night. So I think we need to answer that. We need to reward talent irrespective of where it is.
Thank you. And I have another question here. I guess this comes from the team at Academia 2063. At the 2020 RESAX conference, and thank you again for joining us there, Prof. You were explaining that mechanization should not be limited to tractorization. And the question is, could you please elaborate on this from Africa's perspective? Thank you.
Yeah, what I presented that day was, I was discussing a paper, and that's where Osman and colleagues, we always go wrong here in Africa. We think mechanization is tractor. No, that is just one segment. What I was presenting then, and what I still say, is that we should take a mechanization approach along the value chain. So, for example, if I open up my farm and I cultivate 100 acres of apples, okay, just to give you an example, and I don't invest in, in equipment to harvest, I'll have post-harvest losses because I cannot harvest 100 acres of land using hands. It is too much work, it's time consuming. I'll give you an example. We have a farmer here who harvests, is exporting spices to Europe every day. Okay, some spices. I visited his farm, his greenhouses. He harvests every night, every day, from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. He harvests 30 acres of spices in greenhouses. So how can you do that every day with human labor? You can't. People get sick, people get tired. Yeah? So you need to mechanize. So in other words, even if you invested money in mechanizing, preparing the land, you need to invest money in harvesting, mechanization. You need to invest money in processing. You need to invest money in grading, sorting. I had at that time when I was a PhD student, we had a farmer in Belgium who was growing apples and said he was making losses. Why? Because they were not able to tell which apples are ripe and which ones are not ripe for the market. And he invested money in developing an electric nose at that time to be able to objectively smell which apples and which compounds, to be able to tell the drying, the ripening of the apples, and so that they are packed in that manner. And the farmer was able to make money just by being able to segment which apples will be ready for eating on which day, and you pack them properly. That is enough. We have the same thing. Uganda is the second largest producer of bananas, but a country like Costa Rica, which has fewer bananas but has organized its agriculture and mechanized it, makes more money than Uganda, which is the second largest producer of bananas in the world. So you need to intervene across the whole value chain.
Thank you. I guess the comparison between Costa Rica and Uganda probably reminds me of the comparison we did years back between Thailand and Nigeria in cassava. I think the issue in Uganda is matoke is different from the banana Costa Rica is selling. So you want to eat it first before you sell it. In Costa Rica, they want to sell it first before they eat it. So it's just like Thailand was doing cassava to sell, not to eat, and Nigeria was doing cassava to eat. So that creates a different dynamics in the system. But nevertheless, what you're saying is extremely correct, that it is by mechanizing certain processes that you add value to what you do, not just value in terms of adding, improving the product, but improving the time that you spend, what it gives you at the end of the day in terms of a better, better timing, saving in terms of cost, saving in terms of energy, saving in terms of labor, a lot of things that you can do just through mechanization. But one thing that I would like to ask you, as a professor and somebody who trains technical folks at that level, we at our office in Dakar, when I was at IFPRI, we used to organize open houses for local schools, universities, and so on. And once we invited the university, agricultural university, in a town next to Dakar, to come and visit. And while they were coming, I went to the website to look at what they had so I can understand a little bit more of them before they came. And I looked at their curriculum, the training, and what kind of career move they saw for these students. All I saw coming out of there is to go and be employed by somebody. I didn't see them going out and being entrepreneurs and setting up something and developing something, right? And I say, if you're trained like an engineer in agricultural engineering or agricultural agronomers, breeder, whatever you are, you have skills that you can put to use to create jobs for yourself, but they were looking for which company is the best to hire me, and not putting the skills to start a business in their hands. Is it something that Makerere is doing, or is it something that you see we should be valuing more in training folks, not just to go and be an employee, but to be an entrepreneur, to be able also to have the skills? Of course, people always have their own talents for entrepreneurship, but the skills to start a business are very important for especially people who are trained and who got the technical skills and the know-how to produce. Thank you.
I think you are spot on. We had a similar challenge some years ago, not only in Makerere, but also in other countries, because I've been an examiner across Africa. But increasingly, a lot of African universities noted that, and that we've introduced entrepreneurial skills and teaching them that. But there is also a philosophical question, you know that, Osman. Do we learn to be entrepreneurs at school, or we are born with it? There are people who studied whatever profession, but they never practiced it.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who studied medicine, they have never treated a single patient, and they are the best in class, but their hearts were elsewhere. Mm-hmm. We've trained, I know for the now 17, 18 years I've been here at the university, and I saw it also in the US when I was a postdoc there, and I've seen it also in Sweden and in other European countries where I have been. Increasingly, young people are studying things to impress their parents, get the degree, go and do what they want. So increasingly, you have young people. Osman, your daughter will study at the university, bring the degree to you, say, Daddy, I've achieved this. I think I've paid my dues. Now let me go and start fashion. So you see a lot of young people now, a new generation, people are becoming more entrepreneurial. That is something that is good for our continent. More people are moving away from the traditional ways of just sitting at home. Anyway, the jobs are not there anyway. That is also another thing. I saw in Illinois, I was at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I moved around with my hosts. It was a problem also there in the US. A lot of young people staying in their parents' garages looking for jobs. It's not an African problem. This is a global problem. It's not only here in Africa, even in the UK, in Europe, it's there. So you have young people studying and now trying their luck elsewhere. And that is a trend. And also we're seeing that in Africa.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. While we're waiting to get other questions, let me ask you, as somebody who is working on generating the next generation of engineers and technicians, not just for agriculture, but in general, where do you see technical training, technology training? Where do you see the big trends globally? And where do you see African countries needing to move forward? When we talk about digitalization, we know where things are going, perhaps, and we can reflect on, what are the emerging areas and where African countries should pay attention to. When we talk about biotechnology, we know, where things are coming, gene editing, CRISPR, and what have you, and where they need to be. In terms of engineering, where you are, and we just talked about the need for manufacturing, what do you see emerging there where we can leapfrog and catch up with the rest of the world? And what would that take?
I think the marriage between IT and biological sciences. The marriage between information technology and biological sciences, that's where I think the future is, and that's where Africa can really make a very good impression. Why? because the biological sciences, we have all the raw materials, we have everything favors us. I'll just use an example of solar energy. We have the solar anyway. A lot of countries, I have a project, we are developing a biopackaging with the University of Cambridge. And I'm a research fellow at the University of Cambridge, but we are growing the bananas in a greenhouse in Cambridge. Spending a lot of money to set it up, grow up, mimic the temperature environment in Uganda to grow the same banana we have in Uganda. The banana here is free, it's outside my gate here, I can go and pick it. So the biological materials, we have it. So now what we need is to harness, use technology to harness nature. I think that's where the future is. And also another thing, Osman, that is, which we didn't talk about in our report, but is increasingly also becoming a big thing. And I see it in Nigeria, in Senegal, here in East Africa and Southern Africa. The migration of people, Africans who have studied in top universities going back home. That is also a very important thing. People like me or people who are better than me coming back home to do something good and add to the story. When I met the Pope 2 years ago, he asked me how I've been able to do this in Africa. The landscape is changing. You have people who studied in the top universities in the world, in Nigeria, in Uganda, in Senegal, in all these countries. So we are building a critical mass. So I think we are almost reaching the critical mass to have this. I'll give you an example. In the department where I am, we all have PhDs, but none of us, I think 2 of us studied in Uganda. All of us studied across the world, and we all came back home, and we are now working together as a team. Those networks, the networks we formed, the work we do, I think that is good for Africa.
Thank you. You know, just as you speak, I get 2, I can call them my nieces. They're the daughters of very good friends of mine. They're both moving to Ghana, having been trained here in the United States and the other one in the UAE. And they're both actually next month are going to move to Ghana for work from here. Indeed, I think that this returning back south is certainly a movement that is going to be intensified. It started first with the financial sector, then it went into telecom, and now it's branching out in all different kinds of. And those 2 niches are in health, medical area, and architecture, and both could have made money anywhere in the world, and they're going back to Ghana. Very good.
Yeah, Osman, as a PhD in chemical engineering, at my age, when I was 29, I had that PhD. I could have worked anywhere, but I went back to Africa. And I've been able, if you look at my profile, I don't regret it. Why? Because my colleagues who stayed, even the Belgians whom I studied with, if you look at my research profile, I think I have an admirable research profile. So there's work to do here. We are increasingly doing a good job, and I think we are building increasingly critical mass to change this place.
Excellent, and thank you for doing that. And that's why we have Academia 2063 in the area of economic and development policy research to create a local capacity to exactly do what you're saying, mobilize local expertise, be a catalyst, and create a platform for African talents to do what you exactly have been doing over the last few years. So we got 5 more minutes to go. Maybe that's the time to wrap up a little bit. Prof, do you have any couple of closing statements you wanted to make before we come to the end of our session here?
Yeah, for me, it's just to thank you, and also just to say that I wish to promote academia work also in universities, in the network of universities, such that we also have your link to our university website, such that more and more people participate in this. We are one of the oldest universities in Africa and respected. We are in Africa. We are among the ARUA, African network of universities, the top 18 in Africa, Ibadan, Makerere, Cape Town, and the usual suspects. So I think we think that we can do a good job together to change this press we all love. Thank you for the time and your attention. I also thank Catherine and the team for having kept in touch with me. I look forward to having more and more of these engagements. Knowledge without being shared is like a lighting a candle and you just leave it to go. So sharing knowledge is beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you for the invitation to link up with AHOA. We certainly will do that. We'll take note of it. We have also already reached out to the African Economic Research Consortium, which also has that big network and Rule Forum. So we'll do the same thing also with your network. So thank you for joining us. And thank you to those who have joined our webinar today. Please watch your inboxes for the next webinar. Maybe NABO has already an announcement regarding that. We got a couple more webinars under the Malabo-Montpellier panel banning coming up in the for the rest of the year. So Nabo, would you like to let our participants know what and when, so before we close? Thank you.
Sure, Dr. Usman, thank you very much, Prof. Nabo Banaga, for being with us today. So we have two more webinars coming up. One is scheduled on December 9th, and the second one will be on December 14th. We encourage everyone to register to our newsletter so that you can be aware and register to those.
Do you have the topic of those webinars, Nabo?
Sure, Dr. Usman. So going on our website, you can find them announced, and I'm going to read them.
I think the one on December 14 is on healthy diet. It's about nutrition and the transformation taking place in the African food system landscape. And I think that one is going to be by Professor Cheryl Hendricks from the University of Pretoria, a Malabo-Montpellier panel member. And I think it's going to be, for those interested in nutrition and issues around that, this will be a very, another exciting webinar for us. And then the one on December 9th, Nabu, is?
That one is with Dr. Hyan Wright.
From ILRI?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have the title with you?
Yeah, Africa's livestock sector policies, lessons from countries and the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, ILRI is one of the leading centers globally, and in the CG system, the one in charge of livestock and livestock-related research. So we look forward to seeing you on December 9th and on the December 14th for those two webinars. And thank you to everyone. Thank you, Prof, again. And then we look forward to being in touch and taking your offer to link up with the university networks that you just mentioned to us. Thank you, everybody, and you have a good week. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.